2024 could be one of the worst times to buy a home in the Kansas City area that we've seen in recent history, unless you can check off a couple of these boxes right here. We're going to break all of that down in this video, and if you stick around to the end, we're also going to discuss the one trick that almost guarantees, even if you buy a home right now, that you'll come out on top here in the next 5 to 10 years. Now, before we get into the numbers, the data, all the articles that I've gathered for you, the context behind this video is I have some clients who just closed on a brand new and beautiful new construction home, and at the closing table we're signing the paperwork and the question comes up, like, what in the world is happening with mortgage rates? I thought those were supposed to come down. Is this a bad time for somebody else to go and buy a home? Like, what's going on with that situation? I thought it was an excellent question, an excellent topic for this video. So if you've been following things closely, or you read the news and you've seen the headlines, we have multiple conflicts popping up around the world. The Federal Reserve has failed to get inflation below the 2% number. We're printing tons and tons of money. Here's a look at the consumer price index over the last 5 years. It has never been more unaffordable to be an American citizen than what we're living through right now today, which I don't say that to scare you. That's just the raw reality of what we're going through, and it does have implications on the housing market. One of those is that over the last couple weeks, mortgage rates have gone from 7% to almost 7.5%, which if you were deciding to buy a home this spring, summer, or fall, likely you had seen all the headlines and all the predictions forecasting that mortgage rates would probably start coming down around this time of the year. And unfortunately, there's a massive departure from that for a couple different reasons. The main one is inflation is still ugly. It's still out of control. It's not below the 2% threshold. And as a result, any interest rate cuts that the Federal Reserve had planned to do and that you might have read in the headlines, those are out the window. And according to this article from CBS, which cites several different economists and experts on the topic, there are really 3 different scenarios that could happen with interest rates that subsequently impact mortgage rates and how affordable, how good of a decision it is to buy a home right now. The first scenario is that there could be a slight decrease in mortgage rates and interest rates here pretty soon. Likely not going to happen in the next month or so, but it could happen by June or July. The second scenario is that we won't see anything like that, not even after June or July, and more likely later this year. And then the final scenario, number 3, is that there will not be any change in mortgage rates or interest rates for the remainder of this year. And one of the major reasons why the Federal Reserve could choose to just not cut interest rates and why mortgage rates would stay high as a result is because the election's coming up. And this is something we talked about in the previous market update, which I will link down below in the description in case you want to watch it after this one. But long story short, if you're buying a home this year, whether it's the spring, summer, or even potentially the fall, it's unlikely that we see a major change to mortgage rates as they stand right now, which means if you're buying a home, you have to accept that reality and you have to have a good strategy going into it, which brings us to part 2 of the video, which is why it could be a good or bad time to buy a home in Kansas City. Now, one of the major issues with the Kansas City housing market, and one potential reason why a lot of people are choosing not to sell their home, is just because we've got a massive housing shortage, right? There's just not a lot of inventory out there. If you are in the market to buy a home, you've undoubtedly come across this where you'll see some homes for sale, and some of the homes that are for sale are going off the shelves very, very quickly. But overall, compared to years prior when maybe you shopped for homes, it's almost like a drought. There are fewer options, there are fewer people wanting to sell, and when those homes are on the market, they're either sitting for a long time because they're overpriced, nobody wants to move into them, or they're selling very quickly. And here's what inventory levels look like this year compared to the last 5 years in Kansas City. So I took data from the MLS. This is all sales data for residential single family homes over the last couple years. What you can see is the yellow denotes the month of March, red denotes the month of February, and of course blue is January. And that's the data we have for 2024 so far. So if you look at 2024, the color yellow, meaning the month of March, we've got more inventory that hit the market this year compared to last year, which is a really good sign. Again, it means that even though there are fewer homes compared to 3 years ago, it's better than it was last year. Even though mortgage rates haven't really changed all that much between this year and last year, you do have a few more options, a few more homes hitting the market. The second thing I want to point out is this is starting to become a trend. If you look at the red bar, that shows the month of February in 24 compared to 23 and 22. We're almost on par with where we were in 2022, which means a lot of people have already decided to go ahead, bite the bullet. Even though mortgage rates are high, they're putting their home on the market because they know it's going to sell pretty quickly. And they also know that there's likely not going to be much change to mortgage rates in the foreseeable future. So if they were to sell a home home and turn around and buy a home kind of all equals out at the end of the day. Now, what this all means for you is there are basically three things that I would look at to decide whether or not right now 2024 is a great time to buy a home in Kansas City or not. Before we go into all three of these reasons, the major benefit of buying a home right now: there's less competition. You as a home buyer are competing with other home buyers who maybe are willing to spend more money. Maybe they're willing to forego the inspection. Maybe they're willing to cover the appraisal gap between what they're offering the home seller and what the bank appraises the property at. Competition is always bad for you as the home buyer. There are ways to sidestep it. There are ways to outcompete. But if you don't have to compete with as many people that will jump in the market here once mortgage rates decrease, don't do it. It's never good for the consumer to have to compete with other consumers. That's the reason prices have been exploding over the last couple of years, not just with housing, but across the board. Supply and demand. When there's more demand than there is supply, never a good situation. That's going to get worse as mortgage rates continue to go down. Second major reason it could be an opportune time to buy a home right now is that a lot of banks, just because mortgage rates are so high, they're offering refinance specials, meaning you can purchase at today's lower prices before mortgage rates decrease and prices just absolutely explode. And you can lock in a lower interest rate once they hit the 5% or ideally even the lower 6%, whether they're waiving fees, offering a completely free refinance. There are lenders out there that are offering it. Now, keep in mind that these are general factors to think about and that everybody's situation is different. And if you'd like to reach out and have a conversation about what the strategy would look like if you were to buy a home right now today so that you can get a really good deal, or whether it makes more sense to hold off and wait till these mortgage rates go down and everything, the dust kind of settles here, then make sure to reach out. We'd love to help. Never too busy to take your call. All my contact information is down below. Talk a little bit more about that here at the end of this video. The three main criteria that could determine whether this is a great time to buy or not. The first one is a healthy monthly income compared to that future housing payment. If you can afford that house that you're looking at, you can afford that monthly housing payment at 7.5% interest rate without worrying too much, without squeezing the budget too much, go for it now. Because again, you can lock in that lower interest rate down the road. A lot of lenders are making that far more accessible. And again, you're locking in the lower price today, which means you're getting the best of both worlds. The second major reason it could be a good time to buy a home is if you've got a good amount of equity or a good amount of cash sitting on the sidelines. In fact, I've seen more people who are downsizing, who are selling their current home, downsizing into a smaller one, and just taking all of that equity and buying a home outright in cash. It is off the charts. I've also seen a lot of people take a significant amount of equity from their current home and put above a 20% down payment on the new home. The major thing you want to avoid right now, if you're a conventional borrower, if you're using an FHA loan, you're going to get hit with private mortgage insurance, which is another couple $100 on top of that monthly mortgage payment just for having a lower down payment in the house. If you can avoid it by all costs, absolutely do it. And then the third major reason why it's a good time to buy a home is if you have to. If you're buying a home out of necessity, whether that's a change in family circumstance, you've got to be closer to family, you've got to move with your family, whether you've got a growing family and you've got to purchase a bigger home to accommodate the size of the family, whether you're relocating work, any of those major life events that would force you to buy a home out of necessity rather than just wanting to buy a home, this would be the time to do it because it's just going to get harder once there's more competition in the market and mortgage rates are lower. The major benefit of low mortgage rates, what everybody's waiting for, is that they can afford a bigger house and they've got a lower monthly housing payment. The problem is that they're going to be subsidizing that lower monthly housing payment and that increased buying power with a way higher purchase price. And it depends on what way you look at it, but if you can check any of the three boxes that we just explained, I would go ahead and do it now because the prices are only going to continue to skyrocket and they will get exponentially larger as mortgage rates continue to decrease. Now, the final part of the video, how can you time the market, right? What if you buy a home today, you follow some of the advice in this video and mortgage rates don't decrease? Or what happens if there's some sort of financial ruin that's widespread across the country and housing market takes a hit? I'm going to give you like the simplest approach to buying a home, holding it, making sure that you make equity, that you make money on the home purchase, that I've heard time and time again from people that are way smarter than me, that have hundreds of millions of dollars in the ground and in real estate. And what this all comes down to is a 7-year cycle. Every 7 to 10 years or so, there's some sort of economic cycle. There's a contraction, there's some sort of growth in the economy. And really the way that these people approach investments and specifically real estate is they want to ride the entire cycle. Ideally, you get in at the low and you get out at the top before it starts plummeting again. But if you hold a home for at least 5 years, ideally 7 to 10 years, you're going to ride the whole cycle. And even if there is some sort of downturn on the horizon, which we'll discuss in a second, then you're going to be on top, right? Because you haven't tried to get in and get out at the precisely the right time, which is really just gambling at the end of the day. And we know how that turns out for a lot of people. It's not good. If you approach this from that long time horizon of 5 to 7 years, you will be in a great situation. And that would be my best advice, is if you are going to buy a home today, look at it as a 5 to 10 year investment. Plan on holding that home, being comfortable with that monthly housing payment for that duration. Life always changes, but if you go at it from that philosophy, you're going to be protected for even the worst of the worst situations. Now, I would wholly agree that we are long overdue for some sort of economic crisis. We've got several wars going on. It's never been more unaffordable to be an American. If you look at the Consumer Price Index, which tracks inflation, how quickly the price of everyday goods across the country has risen, it is an absolute disaster right now. But at the same time, the amount of money that people are sitting on, the amount of equity that people have in the ground in their current property is off the charts. The foreclosures that are happening today, they're not short sales. They're not situations where people have negative equity. People are selling their homes with net equity, even in some foreclosure situations. And then finally, probably the best and most assuring reason is supply and demand. We're not a market like you see in several cities around Texas where they're building hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of homes at a time. We have a massive shortage of housing here in Kansas City. And as long as demand outpaces supply, unless there's some massive unforeseen shock that really makes it unaffordable and almost impossible for people to buy homes here in Kansas City, where they lose their jobs, but that doesn't look likely because the job market is strong. And that's part of the reason that interest rates are so high and inflation is high. Long story short, the Kansas City real estate market is nearly resilient. There are a lot of crises on the horizon, but as long as you hold that home for 5 to 10 years and you stick to that and you're buying that home, but planning on that 5 to 10 year cycle, you're going to ride the upside, even if there's some downside, and you're going to come out on top. Now, with all that being said, the things we talked about in this video are a broad generalization. And if you'd like to have a specific conversation about whether this is a great time to buy a home in Kansas City and the strategy for doing it, or the strategy for waiting until things change and there's a more favorable situation for you, we would absolutely love to support you. Have that conversation and make sure that you're set up for success, whether that's buying, building, or selling a home in Kansas City. So all of my contact information is down below in the description. Never too busy to take your call. I love hearing from all of you. So give me a call, text, or email. I'd love to support you, have that conversation, and make sure you're in the best position possible. With all that said, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to watch the previous real estate market update right here, or you can watch the video that YouTube thinks you would enjoy the most right here. So click either this video or this one, and I'll see you on the other side.